Okay, I am going to go ahead and get started. We still have some people logging on, but I want to be respectful of everybody who was right on time, and we have a lot of great information to share, and I want to make sure we have time for a good amount of time for our speakers and then also for questions. So thank you again, everyone, for joining the Idaho Community Foundation for our virtual learning series. As we started out in 2020, we envisioned that we would be traveling around the state, as we always do, and initiating a series of learning opportunities in communities so that we could meet with our nonprofit partners, our donors, and community members to hear about and build on our community conversations. And things changed, as you all know, so we responded by saying, let's see what will happen if we offer an opportunity for virtual learning. And guess what? We have reached our capacity for this particular session. So thank you for joining us and being our guinea pigs in this very first session. For those of you who I haven't met, I'm Karen Billowith, and I have had the privilege of serving as the CEO at Idaho Community Foundation for the past 4.5 years. And I've enjoyed getting out across the state and meeting all of you. I asked people a few minutes ago if they could sign in and let us know where you're tuning in from. And you will see, if you look in the chat function, that we truly do have representation from across the state. So I guess I have been talking about silver linings that we've been finding along the way as we've navigated through these uncertain times. And here's another one, that we're able to actually bring people together from across the state for this opportunity instead of having to segregate in different communities. So with that, we will move forward. And I also do want to thank the Idaho Food Bank and Idaho Nonprofit Center, who will present during this session, for their time and in advance for their participation. Thank you, Alicia, for making sure all of this is moving along smoothly, and to all of the other Community Foundation staff. Before we start, I also wanted to take a moment to acknowledge that this has been a challenging time across Idaho and throughout the country as we've all navigated and responded to the COVID crisis. And now we see our communities deeply divided over issues of diversity, equity, and inclusion. Our board chair, Steve Carr, and I commented on this in our e-bulletin last week. And if you didn't get a chance to take a look at that, it is posted on our website. And I really want to underscore that at the Community Foundation, we know that these issues are relevant and important to our mission, and we'll continue to work not only to bring people and resources together to mobilize philanthropy, but also to ensure that our philanthropy mirrors the people of Idaho and diversity and equity are embedded in our work. As an introduction to our program today, I also will note that the work we've done with the COVID Fund really highlighted that vulnerable populations across the state are disproportionately impacted by COVID-19 and demonstrated the connections between equity, opportunity, and community health and resiliency. And you're going to hear about that through our program today. So I wanted to start at the beginning and just provide a broad overview of the COVID-19 Response and Recovery Fund for Idaho. Early in March, when we first started to hear about the anticipated and existing impacts of COVID-19 and how communities across our country were responding, I immediately called up 2 women who I knew would be helpful, and that was Nora Carpenter at the United Way of Treasure Valley and Amy Little from the Idaho Nonprofit Center. And we asked ourselves, can our organizations come together to do something that we can't otherwise do alone? So in less than 48 hours, we developed the concept for and actually put together the framework for the COVID-19 Response Fund. And I was so pleased that right from the very beginning, we had other foundation partners who came to us and said, we want to work with you, alongside you. So thank you to Wells Fargo Foundation, Blue Cross of Idaho Foundation for Health, Micron Foundation, and the MJ Murdoch Trust, who were our early supporters and helped us then with credibility to coordinate with more than 15 foundation partners, many ICF donor advisors and over 100 individuals who have generously contributed to the fund. To date, we've raised just over $1.8 million, and we've coordinated with other philanthropic and community efforts across Idaho so that we could both keep informed of what was happening, both on resource allocation, but also what the changing needs were across the state. And I'll talk a little bit more about what that looked like in a minute. So the fund was initially set up to be able to quickly respond to communities and organizations across the state. Initially, we really benefited from our peer network of community foundations and the network of United Ways, who had experience responding to disasters. And we looked to the broader foundation community as well, because we all recognize that this called for a new way of doing business. We wanted to be flexible and responsive and to support organizations based on what they determined their needs to be. We also needed to ramp up our efforts quickly. So for those of you who have participated in our grant making in the past, you know that sometimes we are not always quick or responsive because we have a process, as do most foundations. And I was really pleased that both United Way and the Community Foundation were able to say, how can we build this so that we can be more flexible? What we knew early on was that while we were getting up, ramping up our efforts, community organizations were already responding because they saw the increase in demand for their services. So we needed to trust them to use our philanthropic funds where they knew they could do the most good. So that we created some criteria for the fund, but really allowed a lot of flexibility in how the resources would be used. But two things that we did say from the beginning were that the COVID funds that we were allocating throughout the state would not be used to make up lost revenue for nonprofit organizations, except if that revenue was needed to specifically respond to the criteria that we set out in the application. And that we wanted this to complement other funding sources and not be a replacement. And frankly, this has been the challenging thing throughout the whole process because nearly daily, we were learning different things about federal, state, and other resources that became available. So it's been a very dynamic process. Next slide, please, Alicia, thank you. So we also while we learned from our peer networks, we also knew we had to have an Idaho approach. And as I said before, listen to Idaho communities. So we started off through United Way, who did a survey of nonprofit organizations, and the Idaho Nonprofit Center that surveyed nonprofit organizations on other impacts. So we started to gather information, and then we created a very simple application. We also established a steering committee and rapid response review teams in 4 regions in Idaho. Alicia, if you can just go on to the next slide. Thank you. And the steering committee was made up of folks from around the state who worked with United Way organizations, who had worked with the Idaho Community Foundation, our other funding partners, and people who had expertise both in disaster response, public health, and community needs. And then we convened local rapid response teams who had the responsibility to review the applications that came in on a weekly basis and make recommendations for grants going out. We convened those rapid response review teams every week in March and early April. And just yesterday, we had an additional round of grant reviews. So we wanted to share with you the questions that we asked the organizations, because as I said earlier, it was really important that we made this process as simple as possible. So here are the questions that we asked. We called it an application, but it was really just tell us what your needs are, how you're responding, and we will share this throughout our broad network. And that's exactly what we did. We not only used these applications with the rapid response review teams, but we shared applications with our donors at the Community Foundation who were interested in supporting either specific needs or specific organizations. And we shared these with other foundations and other efforts across the state that were also responding to COVID in their communities. So our goal was really to do two things: to ensure that there was coordination of the distribution of resources, and also that the nonprofit organizations weren't repeatedly asked for the same information from multiple funding sources. So we believe that we did a pretty good job of embodying trust-based philanthropy throughout this process. And in the end, we are, well, I can't say in the end because we're not there yet. But to date, we've distributed over $1.1 million to 96 organizations working with vulnerable populations in the areas of housing, food and basic needs, domestic violence, childcare, and health. And what you'll see now on your screen is how that breaks down by program area and also by region of the state. As I just said, we also did another round yesterday, so we have now recommendations for an additional $200,000 of funding that will go out. So, like I said, this is dynamic. Even the slide needs to be updated already, both on the total amount committed line, but also in the grants that have been awarded. We do expect to see some changes as we move through the response and move into recovery in the program areas. For example, when school starts again, we may see childcare, and people go back to work, we may see childcare as a greater need. But this is how it has broken down so far. So, as I said, we're not finished yet. We're working with our steering committee to discuss and talk about what does recovery look like. I'm sure that you have all read that there's a lot of uncertainty about whether or not we have gotten through this crisis, and some expect that we may see crisis again. So we're reserving some of the funds for response later in the year, but also building on our learnings. So we did learn that funding needs manifested differently in different regions. And what this looked like in North and Southwest, housing and food security were major needs. In South Central and East, food and basic needs were the strongest need areas. We also learned a really important lesson for the Community Foundation, and I hope for other funding organizations across the state, and that was that the areas of impact were amplified. So the needs that we were seeing across the state are not new needs. I'll talk a little bit about our areas of impact in a moment, but basic needs, food security, childcare, housing, we know that these have been ongoing needs in our communities. And when we say they're amplified, they are worsened by this current crisis. So as we move to recovery, we really want to think about how do we build stronger communities so that we're able to respond in an improved way the next time a crisis hits. We also learned that several communities have multiple entities working on similar issues that have never coordinated action. And many nonprofits were not able to utilize federal and state funding. So one of the reasons we asked Amy Little from the Nonprofit Center to speak today is she's going to give us a better look at the nonprofit capacity picture for Idaho. The other thing, the last bullet, I just want to take a moment to talk about, because I know that many of you who are on this call today know either volunteer for or know people in your communities who would like to volunteer. And that's been really difficult with the COVID restrictions. However, what we did learn was that volunteer-based organizations were in great need of volunteers for a lot of different reasons. So we like to encourage people to find out what they can do to help in their local communities if they're looking to respond in some way. Okay, can you go on to the next slide, please, Alicia? So I talked about the Idaho Community Foundation's areas of impact and how these are connected to the COVID fund. And as many of you may know, in 2018, we traveled around the state and had community conversations in communities to hear what people in those communities believed were the greatest needs and also what promising solutions were. And then last year, we worked on a couple of community health assessments in different parts of the state, which really confirmed the same things that we heard in those community conversations, that there were specific areas of need that resonated over and over. And we came up with 4 priority areas, and those became the Community Foundation's areas of impact. Those are listed on your screen now. So across the state, whether we're in North Idaho, Southwest, East, all of these were priority issue areas for those communities. But what we also learned was that each community may be addressing these in different ways. So the Community Foundation is not only looking at areas of impact now with our Forever Idaho Fund grant making, but also we're looking at how do we get more regional input into the way that we do our work. So we've developed 4 regional councils, which we're starting to implement across the state, that will help us do more, engage communities more, and have more robust conversations around these areas of impact. And these next 2 slides just really demonstrate that through our grant making in 2019, we have already been focusing on these areas of impact based on having donors who are interested in specific issues, and also by the organizations that we work with in the community. So for our Forever Idaho grants last year, you'll see that the areas that received funding mirror in a lot of ways the same areas that were receiving funding through the COVID fund. And then on the next slide, this is our total grant making. So just under 8.5 million. And it also falls in the same percentage, roughly the same percentage areas as those other grants do as well. So I think it's important to also say at this point to those of you from community organizations, but also to our donors out there, the other category is a pretty large number and percentage, and will continue to be, because one of the things that makes working with the Community Foundation so wonderful is that we actually support the broadest range of community activities, including open space, parks, beautification projects, arts, culture, and those are the types of grants that fall in that other category. All right, now I am so excited, number one, to stop talking, but also because as we worked through working with other funders, working with our donors, and thinking about the COVID fund, one of the things that we kept hearing over and over again was the increase in food insecurity that was being manifested throughout the state, and how our donors and our nonprofits could help. So because this was really an issue area that rose to the top as in the COVID grants, but also through our own grant making, we wanted to hear from the experts and let you hear from the experts about the status of their efforts and the statewide efforts around food insecurity. So we've asked Karen Bauk and Jackie Yarborough from the Idaho Food Bank to provide an update. And I'm just thrilled. Karen has also been serving on our steering committee for the COVID fund, and she's added the type of expertise and perspective that was really critical to our thinking as we moved through that process. So thank you, Karen. And I'm not sure which of you will kick it off, so I'm just going to turn it over.
Thank you, Karen, and I'll go ahead and kick it off. Hi, everybody. I'm Karen Bauk, and it's a pleasure to be able to spend some time with you today. I see several familiar names on the screen. Thanks for joining us, and also want to extend appreciation to Karen and to the Idaho Community Foundation for making these grants available through the COVID fund. The Idaho Food Bank was able to receive one of those grants, and boy, the timing was perfect. It was definitely the kind of help that we needed right at that time. So I wanted to share a little bit of information about what we're seeing, what we did see and experience, and what we're seeing around food insecurity in Idaho as a result of COVID-19. You know, Jackie and I have both been at the food bank for more than 10 years. And I think it's safe to say that the last 3 months have been the most unusual and the most challenging that we have experienced over those 10 years. nothing we could have predicted. But at the same time, can't tell you how proud I am of the team and our ability to respond, and how grateful we are for the amazing support that's been made available to us from community members and other individual donors as well. It's been really very heartwarming. So by way of just starting out with a little bit of overview background about the Idaho Food Bank, 3 key areas of focus: to feed, educate, and advocate for those who are food insecure in our state and needing additional assistance. And then if we go to the next slide, I want to give you kind of a quick snapshot look of what our services look like. We are a statewide organization. We have 3 facilities: Boise, Pocatello, and Lewiston, and we branch out from those 3 facilities at the community level. We do that through partnerships with about 150 schools and about 250 community-based organizations. So I like to say we have a statewide reach with a local touch. It's so important to have those local partners. They know day to day and more directly what the needs of their communities are. And so we really work to support them. We also have a direct distribution mobile pantry program because of Idaho's rural nature. There are some very small communities that may not have a food pantry or a food bank. So we come in and provide that food through our mobile program. And you can see the colored dots represent different types of food services that we provide. And I think that visual really shows you what that reach looks like across the state. Next slide. Talk a little bit about the impact that we've seen from COVID-19. We're part of the National Association of Food Banks under Feeding America, which gives us access to really great research. And we recently were able to receive some updated reports that are very telling. It's called Map the Meal Gap. And every year we get a Map the Meal Gap report that looks back a year at food insecurity, and lots of great data to the county level, by income bands. Really, we can really dig in by ages and a lot of different profiles of people who are food insecure. On this slide, if you look at the 2 circles where the numbers are in white, those are the most current numbers from 2018 data that show us that 189,970 individuals in Idaho, or 1 in 9, were food insecure, and 1 in 8 of our children. Now, I got to tell you, seeing these numbers was really encouraging because those are the lowest numbers we've seen since before the Great Recession. So to see those numbers continuing to come down and get to that level that we hadn't seen in 10 years was really exciting, until COVID-19 hit and all of that changed. Overnight, that changed, and rapidly the number of food insecure people went up. The other numbers you're seeing on the screen, the 1 in 6 and the 1 in 4, those are projections that, again, were done through this national study protocol, anticipating what hunger will look like in Idaho with a sustained unemployment of 11.5%. Quite a jump in the number of individuals, 49% increase in the number of individuals, a 75% increase in the number of children. And of course, that just touches my heart. I'm a former elementary school teacher, and I, still have the vision of the kids in my classroom. And when I think of 1 in 4 kids in a classroom who are food insecure and struggling with hunger, that's pretty alarming. We're not at that level today. Oh man, I hope we don't get there. But we don't know what the economy is going to be like going forward and how successful we'll be at controlling the virus. So these are the numbers that we're watching. We did see an immediate increase in food insecurity across the state. It varies from one community to the next. Not surprisingly, Blaine County saw the fastest and sharpest increase in food insecurity. Their numbers tripled immediately. Not every community was hit that drastically. So we've been working at the community level to be responsive to their needs. Overall, on a statewide level, we set a goal to increase our food distribution by 30%. And we've been tracking with that to make sure that's enough? Do we need to dial it up? Do we need to dial it down? And at this point, we're holding at that 30% increase in the food distribution. So if we go to the next slide, a couple of other highlights of areas of focus we've had. That increased food distribution equates to an additional 300,000 pounds. We work in pounds of food. That doesn't mean anything to the general population. But what that equates to is enough food for an additional 2 million meals every month. We also had to shift the way we were distributing the food because of social distancing and all the safety protocols. We had to start pre-boxing our food in order to hand out at the mobile pantry. So families drive through in their car, we put the box in the car. So there's less contact between people and getting that food to them in a faster method. We've also had to very quickly move our process for acquiring food. Previously, we were very fortunate to have about 90% of the food that we distributed was donated. We have an amazing base of donors in this state. That also went away. The food supply, you've heard the stories, the food supply was immediately interrupted. The donated food was no longer available. We had to start purchasing food right away. And to date, we purchased 25 truckloads of food, and we're not done. Unfortunately, the donated food's starting to come back, but it's slow. So we're still having to purchase the food. And just to put that into the monetary reference for you, typically we spend about $200,000 a year in purchasing food. Since March, we've spent $900,000 in purchasing food. That's the impact that it's had on our business model. So we'll keep moving forward. Now with that, I'm going to turn it over to Jackie because we want to make sure we also emphasize that we have not stepped away from our focus on health. Yes, we're known for distributing food, but our major emphasis is on health. And I'll let Jackie talk about that.
Thank you, Karen. I want to make sure that everyone can hear me okay. Good. As Karen said, my name is Jackie Yarbrough. I'm the Vice President of Community Initiatives at the Idaho Food Bank. Again, thank you so much for this opportunity to share everything that the Idaho Food Bank is doing and does to support our communities across the state. I want to talk now about our Hunger to Health strategy. Next slide, please. And help bring everyone up to speed in regard to what we've been focusing on now very significantly for the past 3.5 years. Our Hunger to Health initiatives include a focus on nutrition, education, and community health, and that relationship between food insecurity, nutrition, and health, and how food insecurity can negatively impact someone's health if they don't have access to the kind of food and the variety of food that they need. Next slide, please. Thank you so much. Our first initiative is our nutrition initiative. We started really taking a look at and focusing on not only the kinds of food and the variety of fresh and perishable food that's been coming into the Idaho Food Bank now for the past 12 years, I would say, and there's been a very big change since the Great Recession and the availability of fresh and perishable food. We've been focusing on healthy food and actually measuring the variety of that food and the nutritional value of that food. So making sure that we're hitting those 5 food groups and ensuring that families who are experiencing food insecurity and not only coming to our mobile pantries, but also to visit the food pantry partners and meal sites across the state are getting access to a variety of healthy and nutritious food, and supporting our partner network as they are serving their local communities. We're measuring this and we're holding ourselves accountable to projections and goals to make sure that we're bringing in the right kinds of foods and the requests of foods from our partner organizations. Along with nutrition, we want to focus on education, and that includes our Cooking Matters program and direct education of individuals who are experiencing food insecurity, but also educating our partner agency network around the the connection between, again, food security, nutrition, and health, but how they at the pantry level can also provide nutrition education and nutrition information to food recipients that are coming in to access food boxes. We really want to make sure we're providing education materials, doing food demonstrations, and teaching people how to cook the food that they are receiving from us, but also why the food is so important in regard to their health. And we really want to make that choice the healthy choice and the easy choice for them. Going to the next slide. We've had a large increase in our healthcare partnerships over the course of the past 3 years. And we've been partnered in and focused on being a great leader and contributor regarding community health assessments and community health projects. We've been able to come in and bring that subject matter and content expertise in regard to food security, but also helping to provide solutions for communities to address their local food insecurity issues, and how they can come into partnership to be a part of the solution at the local level. We've been working with other stakeholders, including healthcare providers, hospitals, schools, other nonprofit organizations, our government entities, and then also industry leaders. And that's been some very exciting work for us. I could say, I have a really great example of some work that happened in the community of Marsing that would never have come together to help boost their community hub model, their community resource center model, by bringing in all of us together to help them lean in and serve the children and families in their community. As a part of our focus on community health, we embarked upon a series of community health forums, and through some generous donations through St. Luke's, we hosted 5 community health forums this past year in the communities of McCall, Twin Falls, Boise, Nampa, and Meridian. We had over 150 participants in those health forums. The participants consisted of community health organizations, our partner agency network, schools, district health departments, family health clinics, and actually attendees from hospitals. And what was so great about this is it brought us all together to understand not only why we wanted to get the information out about that health, food insecurity, and nutrition connection, but how as collective organizations we can come together to have a greater impact by working together. And I think some wonderful examples of that are the work that's happening in the city of Nampa with the Healthy Impact Nampa Coalition, as well as the Garden City Collaborative, and as I previously referenced, the Marsing Hub and Community Resource Center that has been set up there. As we are able to provide support and also leadership, we're also able to come in and be a connector and get people connected to the right kinds of programs and services, but also just make introductions, because we know that the benefit of the leverage that we have to bring others in will really help and support our communities. And with that concludes my section of this presentation for the Idaho Food Bank. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Jackie and Karen. I think we'll hold questions until the end. I did see one come in the chat, which I think is for the food bank. So we'll go ahead and come back to that at the end. I want to make sure we have time for Amy. So we're going to switch gears a bit, and Amy Little is going to talk about the environment in which nonprofits are operating at our current moment, and for some all the time. And I think one of the things that we have been really trying to communicate broadly to our network is that although the COVID-19 fund is really focused on the United Way Alice population and other vulnerable populations that, as I said earlier, are being disproportionately impacted by the economic and health related impacts of COVID, all of our nonprofits are being impacted by really this perfect storm of potentially an decrease in contributions as donors either redirect their resources or are cutting back. And also, really importantly, that a lot of nonprofit organizations have some type of fundraisers or other revenue generating activities that they've had to put off for this year. So the Nonprofit Center has done a lot of surveys with nonprofits across the state to get an idea of how they have been impacted. And I'm going to turn it over to Amy to paint that picture for you. Thanks so much, Amy. Amy, we can't hear you. It doesn't show up on our screen that you are on mute.
Okay, is it working now?
Yes, thank you.
Okay. Oh my goodness. I use Zoom all the time and still. Sorry about that. So thank you so much for having me. My name is Amy Little, and I'm the Chief Executive Officer at the Idaho Nonprofit Center. So just really quickly, thank you for the opportunity. And I just wanted to say thanks to our nonprofits for your amazing support of our communities, and also to those of you on the call who invest your resources of time, talent, and treasure in our nonprofit community. It really does take all of us working together to make a difference. Just really quickly, our mission is to educate, advocate, and collaborate in support of stronger nonprofits. And we are a statewide organization, much like the food bank. This year, with the COVID pandemic, we had to completely shift gears. So all of our programs and services were immediately realigned around this COVID pandemic. And we've done a ton of research over the last several months, just learning immediately what your challenges are as a nonprofit sector. Long-term, what do you think you're kind of up against? We have also collected some really great data that was shared with the governor last week around what are the impacts of canceled events on nonprofit revenue. So that was awesome for us to be able to provide that information. And then beyond that, we've done a ton of education and advocacy work on behalf of the nonprofit sector. So and I'll be talking about the Paycheck Protection Plan, emergency injury disaster loans. So we did a lot of education and advocacy around those pieces of legislation as well. So we as a team were really feeling a renewed sense of purpose around our mission. For our organization, it was the perfect time for us to step in and really lead our fellow nonprofits through some of these challenges. So and as we all know, there's still a lot of work to be done and new work that has come forward for all of us. So I just one thing I want to say before I kind of get into my slide, and I don't have pretty slides like the food bank did, but I just I'm going to talk to them. But COVID didn't actually create a whole lot of new challenges in the nonprofit sector. It amplified those challenges in many ways. And I just want to say nonprofits and nonprofit leaders are the most creative problem solvers, wicked good financial managers, change embracing agents in the business world today. And I say we're part of the business world. We're small businesses, really, when you think about it. And what COVID did was it really put a magnifying glass on our challenges as a sector. It amplified those support gaps in our community. But then I always want to say positive things, and it really allowed our sector to shine, especially in our ability to do more with less, collaborate at every opportunity, and really support our communities in so many ways as we fulfilled our mission. So it's been an interesting journey for sure, but there's been a lot of positive around all of the struggles and the challenges. So when we ask nonprofits, which we do every year through a needs assessment, what is your greatest challenge? Funding always comes up, and funding is for everything. It's for fulfillment of your mission. It's staffing capacity. It's capacity for your programs and services. So funding really ties into everything that we do. So throughout this COVID pandemic that continues, at the state and federal level, and then also with partnerships with a community foundation and United Way, there were a lot of opportunities for nonprofits actually to find the funds, needed to at least support some of their mission-related work. So we had the Paycheck Protection Plan, we had emergency injury disaster loans from the Small Business Administration, which you had to apply for in 2 different places. So it wasn't one application. One was through the SBA, one was through a lender. Rebound Idaho, there were $300 million worth of grants. We'll talk about that shortly. COVID relief funds through the Community Foundation and United Way and the Nonprofit Center, but there were COVID relief funds throughout the state. It was really, and I know Karen talked about this earlier, but just to see the partnership and collaboration statewide in support of our nonprofits and their, their emergency work that they were doing in that moment, serving our most vulnerable citizens, was pretty incredible. What I will say about the funding that we were able to access is there's no one-size-fits-all approach. So for some nonprofits who are maybe a little bit smaller, it was hard to navigate the application process. Some of our larger nonprofits had too many employees and they couldn't even apply for it. The money ran out, the emergency injury disaster loans ran out. Interestingly enough, Rebound Idaho had $300 million. They were estimating over 30,000 grants. And after only 1 week of having that portal open, just over 2,000 applications had been applied for and approved. What happened was, a lot of folks were able to get payroll protection plan funds in the second round of funding. But there's a lot of smaller nonprofits who are basically volunteer run that didn't and couldn't apply for payroll protection funds, that weren't eligible for these Rebound Idaho grants either. So we've been working with the coronavirus finance committee and hoping to make some other funds available for those more volunteer run nonprofits in our rural communities. So and that's where we see them a lot of time. So what I loved is, again, the COVID relief funds were very specific funding priorities, which were the right priorities, but there's a whole group of nonprofits that actually do great things in our communities and really provide our quality of life, but weren't eligible to apply for those funds. We did a research project on event revenue. So what we found was no one-size-fits-all approach to events and the impacts on nonprofits. Immediately out of the gate, nonprofits who had their big galas were having to cancel them, and that was lost revenue for them, or reschedule them. But when we did the survey, what kind of blew us away that we were really actually happy to share is there's, when we talk about lost event revenue, we're not just talking about the run-of-the-mill, annual, auction gala. Nonprofits actually use events to drive very creative and clever revenue streams for their operations and their organizations. That becomes unrestricted funding that they can leverage. So when I think about the Idaho Botanical Garden and their concert series, I think about the YMCA hosts their runs. They have about one every single month, which helps provide a small stream of revenue for their organization. Golf tournaments, church services, outdoor music or art festivals. So they can be small scale, they can be large scale, but the impacts were significant. Again, what we found is larger, better resource organizations didn't rely as much on those events for their revenue, but in smaller, more rural communities, the impact was even greater. So what we're seeing, again, is in small rural communities, a lot of times they're volunteer run, and they weren't always necessarily able to apply for some of these programs. So we just saw some different things happening in different places in our communities. And I'm trying to go through this really quickly because I want to be super mindful of your time. But when I talk about the others, so what I mean by the others, those are arts, humanities, animal welfare, education, those that aren't providing necessarily direct support services to food, housing, insecure, or ill community members, but they're still members of our nonprofit sector that provide the quality of life that we all enjoy. And what we'll see as we get back to normal is additional gaps in these service providers, as they found few opportunities for those for funding throughout this COVID pandemic. So they saw a decline in donations. They weren't always eligible to apply for some of the funds that were needed. And one point I want to make about payroll protection and emergency injury disaster loans and some of these other things, most of the time, nonprofits, all of the time, I'll be honest, we're behind the 8 ball. So we're already in a financial crunch from right out of the gate. And then COVID hit. And so even though even payroll protection plan was awesome, we applied, we received the funds, but it was based on our 2019 payroll. But what happened with a lot of nonprofits, and I'll talk about this at the very end, is they saw an increased demand in services. They needed to staff up, but a decrease in resources. So it really was a stopgap measure. It wasn't a fix. So, so I just wanted to kind of be clear about that. So there's a lot of other organizations who really are still kind of in need and needing to reopen and provide those quality of life services in our community. And so that's just something for us to kind of keep an eye on and think about. Another challenge has been bringing employees back to work. So I know some of our larger organizations furloughed employees, laid employees off. And while the government was awesome in trying to make sure that folks had money to, pay the bills and get by, those that extra bonus that they received on unemployment has actually created a whole entire situation where our folks don't want to come back to work because it's actually better for them to remain on unemployment. So I was giving a standing ovation when the governor announced last week. I was actually watching the press conference that there were back to work grants available for employees, whether you have already gone back to work or then go ahead and work. So that was first come, first serve, of course, but I think that's going to continue to be a struggle. It's not a get rich quick scheme working in the nonprofit sector, as we know. So bringing folks back to work, I do know has been challenging, and I know it's been challenging everywhere, but I have heard a lot of that again from our more rural communities as well. Another big challenge for us is that PPE in the supply chain. Again, the state came up with a way that we could and again, the last point on my slide, which I've kind of already talked about, but all of us have seen an increased demand in our services, but a decline in revenues. And at the nonprofit center, we're no different than any other nonprofit out there. So it's been a challenge, I think, for all of us, for the entire sector. But these challenges that we're facing and these capacity gaps that we've always had. They just might look a little bit different, but they definitely will continue on throughout the next several months. So the last thing I just want to say before I kind of end things, because I know we're getting short on time, but funding has and always will be our greatest challenge as a nonprofit sector. What we need is more unrestricted funding for our nonprofits to utilize and leverage that allows those nonprofit leaders to make sound business decisions with the fulfillment of our missions in mind. And really, that's the greatest gift that we can give. And aside from funds, we always need champions and cheerleaders of our work in the communities that we serve at the state and federal level. Anytime that you can stand up and support the work of your nonprofits and what they do in your community, and advocating for resources and supports that they need, is incredibly helpful. So with that, I will stand down so that I know we don't have a ton of time for questions, but I tried to go quick. So thank you.
Thank you, Amy. Great job. And that's great information to share. I will also underscore what you said about unrestricted grants. And this has been a trend in the philanthropic community for a while, although most foundations are still giving, very specific grants for programs. One of the things that we were able to do at the Community Foundation for our grants for many of our grants from 2019, and as we look forward in 2020, is to lift restrictions and work with our donors to do the same so that organizations could be more responsive. And we're seeing that as we begin to review applications for our regional grants that came in pre-COVID. We are going back and asking organizations if they have changed their needs or if they're still running that particular program. So echo the importance of that, and I encourage others who are in that position to do that. So we have only a few more minutes left for some questions. There was a question for Amy, and I actually think I might know the answer to this, but Amy, the question is, do you have public access to the data from the survey, or I guess that's the question. Do you have that information?
No, I do, and I don't. We haven't actually made it public, but why don't I shoot? Well, actually, I think I sent it to Kara, so you guys are welcome to share that with this group, and I will get that queued up on our website. But yeah, feel free to share that with the folks that are registered for this session.
Excellent. Another question came through about whether this was being recorded, and we did not say that at the beginning, but it is. So we will be able to share that with people who either have interest in hearing again or were not able to participate. I believe that this question in the chat room was for the food bank, or it could be for Idaho Community Foundation, but I think it was during the food bank. How does a rural community reach out for consistent outreach in their community? So in other words, how does a rural community connect with the food bank to ensure that they're getting access to some of the services that you talked about?
Hi, Karen. This is Jackie Yarbrough. If they would just like to give us a call at 208-336-9643, that would be great. Or if they want to just send me their information in the chat, I'm glad to get them connected wherever they need to be.
Excellent. Thank you.
You bet.
And a question, can you send out a copy of the questions on the COVID application? We sure can. And actually it was part of the presentation, and I think we could just send out everybody's slides to all of the participants, so you'll have all of this information. Yep, so Kara on our team says we'll share out the link to the recording and the slides and the information that Amy shared. And that is a great reminder to me to say thank you to all of my team at the Community Foundation. Many of them are listening today, but none of the work that we talked about, that I talked about, or any of the work that I usually talk about could be accomplished without such a great team. And a special shout out to Carol Walker, Lisa Berg, and Sarah Wisenbach, who are all on this call, who have really been able to make sure that we could meet our promise to rapidly deploy those resources. And they've been working pretty much around the clock in the beginning. We also have Tina Murphy and Christy Scott, our regional officers, on as well. So if you're outside of the Treasure Valley, southwestern Idaho, we have folks that travel throughout your region as well. So let's see. It's a little hard to both talk and read at the same time, but are there other questions? I'm gonna wait another minute before I fully sign off, because I know some people it takes a minute to type them in. We'd love to hear your responses as well to the value of this format and your time today. You can put that in the chat box, or you can reach out to me or Kara Walker and let us know. As I said, Alicia, can you go back one slide? We will be holding our planned education series virtually this year. So over the next few weeks, be on the lookout. We're going to ask United Way to present on the updated ALICE report. As I mentioned earlier, we framed the COVID grant priorities around the ALICE population, and we'll have updated information to share about that really soon. The Community Foundation was happy to provide support for that report in partnership with our United Ways across the state. We will also do a deeper dive into the areas of impact that were mentioned. So we'll bring on other experts in each area to talk about the different ways our communities are being impacted, but also responding. And a special project for us is the Pacific Northwest Resilient Landscapes Initiative, which is a partnership of the Oregon Community Foundation, Seattle Foundation, and the Idaho Community Foundation to help conserve lands across our region. So with that, I hope you all enjoy the rest of this day. Be well, be safe as we all start going out in public again. And thank you. As Amy said, we wouldn't be where we are without the great work of our nonprofits and the support of our donor community and everyone else. So we appreciate your partnership in our mission to improve the quality of life in Idaho. Thanks, everyone.